Hello, friends, and welcome back to Becoming Unbound, the podcast where we explore what it really means to break free from the expectations, fears, and limitations that hold us back. Whether you're seeking more freedom in your career, relationships, mindset, or even your daily life, this is the space for honest conversations, unfiltered truths, and inspiration to help you find your fullest, most unbound self. So today on the podcast, I have a truly fascinating guest and friend joining me, Sabrina Sundari. She is a dedicated somatic therapist helping people reconnect to their bodies and heal from attachment and relationship trauma. So, in this episode, we're diving into the power of somatic healing and why nervous system regulation is a game changer. So, whether you're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or just curious about somatic work, this conversation is packed with insights you do not want to miss. So, let's get into it. Sabrina, welcome to the
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you
podcast.
again.
So nice to have you. You have been such a wonderful inspiration. And I know we've been trying to get me on your podcast, but you were kind of the first friend that I ever had that dove into the world of podcasting. So just know that you are an inspiration to sort of the things that I've thought about and starting my own. And sometimes it just helps that someone that's doing it and it gives you that confidence to say, I can do this too. So Sabrina, I just wanted to chat first and maybe we can tell the listeners about sort of how do we know each other and, how have we come to be and our relationship, and maybe I'll get you to sort of start off with the depiction of our relationship thus far.
Yeah, it's funny because we live very close to each other, like walking distance, but I almost never have personal interaction with you because I don't know, it's just living in Toronto, like everyone's just got their own life. So sometimes we do co-working and we go to each other's events and parties, which I really enjoy. Carly hosts really amazing parties if you're lucky enough to get invited. Yeah. And I've known you for maybe 5 years. Yeah. And yeah, just the evolution of each other has been pretty incredible to witness in those 5 years.
The first time I met you, I picked you up on the side of the street in the East End. You were coming to one of the yoga retreats that I was hosting out in Kingston at our friend's farm. And that was the first time that we met. I don't know how you found out about it. I think just through our circle, you found out about the retreat. And yes, in my days of teaching yoga, that was the first retreat that I had ever held. And so that was a very cool experience. And I think we met very organically. You just kind of showed up. I drove you and we had a
Yeah, it
great
was really
weekend.
lovely. I forgot that's how we met. So thanks for that.
That was a beautiful weekend where we decided to be a little rebellious and still get together and do really amazing work out on the Freedom Farm in Kingston. So Sabrina, why don't you introduce yourself? What do you do? How do you live your life? Like what are the intricate things? You can tell as much details as you want.
Yeah. Opened an in-person office for somatic therapy. So I've studied somatic experiencing, which is Peter Levine's school. And I got into somatics just because I had spent years in traditional talk therapy, like trying to heal my own relational trauma, my own childhood stuff. And I only got so far. Like intellectually, I knew everything. Like I could write a book on why I was doing things, but I was still doing things. I was still getting into the same kind of relationships. And I realized that I could say the script of what to say and I knew everything that I should be thinking, but my body was like leading the way. It was almost compelling me to do this, right? This like anxiety or this longing or this desperation or this freeze when something would happen that felt like it was off, but I would just freeze and like smile and pretend everything was okay until things got really bad, right? So I kept going like, how do I not get to that point? How do I stop early? And the somatics was the key to that, like learning how to read my own system and my own bodies as the oracle instead of, letting my mind run or letting my hormones run or even letting other people tell me what to do. Because sometimes friends would tell me, oh, I'd be like, this person isn't that great for me. And they'd talk me out of it. Like, oh no, they're great. They have this and this and this. They're doing this and this. So like, it's so hard to meet somebody. You should just give it a shot. And so I'd go against my inner knowing. Or I used to see a lot of psychics, and they'd be like, this person's like this. And I'm like, the reason I'm seeing you is because I feel like they're not like that. And then it was just this journey of stop listening to everyone else, stop listening to the machinations of my mind, and listen to the wisdom of my body.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I've been a part of some of your um, free online classes and groups, and I am also fascinated with the somatic healing world. And so that's really powerful that you were able to find that awareness that, yeah, the typical sort of therapies that have been suggested to me, whether that's talk therapy with a therapist or going to your girlfriends or things like that, like those things get to a certain point and then they kind of can stop, and it stops being helpful, and then it just contributes to the
Yes.
noise. I've seen you've gone through so many beautiful journeys, whether it's trainings and things like that. I think the work that you are involved with is so sort of enmeshed and entangled with the idea of becoming unbound and not being shackled by our hormones or our bodily reactions or our old traumas or stories. Like, we can live an entire life just being shackled to those automatic reactions or those constant looking for external validation in the world, where we talk to every single friend except for asking what we want or listening to those heart sounds. So I was really excited to have you on the podcast today, because I feel like that work can often be even the first step to understanding where you are stuck. And so, was there a moment when you realized, I mean, you said you talked about talk therapy. Was there a moment where you realized, like, specifically, and you can, again, share as much detail as you want, but that you understood that you weren't in a place of freedom where you could understand and listen to yourself? Like, what was that moment where you're like, oh, I've got to do something different here, because whatever I've been doing isn't working and is having me still shackled to these old ideas or paradigms?
I think it would have been about a year, two, almost 2 years ago. I was in a relationship. At that point, I was really interested in somatics. We both know Luis Mojica, right? I took his course, and it was a short course, and I was really, it was in the world, but it wasn't. I never thought I could do it. And when I was in this relationship, I was dabbling in the somatic inquiry, and but I was also like engrossed in this relationship that was ended up being pretty what I would call toxic at the end. And now, like, having so much time to reflect on it, and I had to unpick it. How did that happen? How did I get there? Because I know better. I knew better, and I talked myself out of it every step of the way. And a lot of it was because he met attachment needs that I had, and I was pinging off the chemicals and the feelings, and also the freeze. Like, there were so many pieces as to why I continually went against my intuition. Actually, when I first started dating this person, I was getting a massage, and I got this message during the massage, like just a voice in my head, and it said, "He's not the one. He's an initiation." And so I started dating him, going like, "Okay, he's not the one, but I'm going to have an experience." And then I let all that stuff happen really fast, right? I let go of my intuition. That was very clear. And I got really into the situation very fast. I don't know if you remember, but I was going to move to BC. Yeah, like pretty quickly. So that was just the last straw for me. Um, and I'm like, I'm not having another relationship like this. This person, like, to be fair, was like a master trickster, right? It wasn't just a regular person. This was somebody who also was teaching workshops in attachment, also said that they were a relationship expert, that they had a business platform around relationship coaching. Like, they knew how to talk the talk and walk the walk. I was going in having put them on a bit of a pedestal already. And that, I think that was part of what happened as well. So the whole situation really leveled out, being like, again, why did I get into this? Okay, put somebody on a pedestal. I didn't listen to my intuition. I listened to everyone else. I listened to my friend, who, again, was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I would love somebody who was like this, and who wanted me so much and had this much to offer. And yeah, there's problems, but that's normal. And so I was like, okay, I listened to my friend. And then I saw this psychic, and she's like, oh, he's a really good person, and you're so compatible. And at the time, it didn't seem right to me. She was like, you're 86% compatible. And you could break up, but then you meet somebody who's like 85%. And like, it was just like, how do you get these numbers? How do you, where's this coming from? And so again, I was like, okay, this person's saying I should, this person's saying I should. And also like I'm devotional. Like if I'm committed, I'm loyal, and I'm like, I see the wounding, I see the why the behavior is happening. I can see it all, and I'm gonna stay and I'm gonna be with you as we work on it. Now my perspective is I'm not interested in working on things like that with people outside of a client relationship. I'm not looking for a project. I'm looking for a partner that's like done their own work and can meet me at the level of like, let's build something new, not like spending the whole time repairing from past triggers.
Wow. And so, how does somatic work and healing help you to understand more about those patterns that maybe got you into that? Like, what are some of the things that help you to understand yourself more in those situations?
So with somatics, it's all about staying present in the moment and staying present with what's happening. So the opposite of that is what I was doing, which is like future dreaming, right? Or being obsessed with the past and like trying to understand why, what compassionate lens can I provide that makes like justifies this behavior instead of staying present, which is like what exactly is happening now. I'm not looking for future promises. I'm not looking for anything else other than like what's happening now. And what's happening now is that I'm feeling constricted. I'm feeling like my breath is short. I feel like my stomach hurts. I feel like my posture is hunched over, right? So what are the signals that I can trust my body more than I can trust anyone else and more than I can trust my mind? I don't trust my mind as much as I trust my body.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I feel that we can very much become like slaves to our mind or our emotions. And I've worked a lot on this idea that you can become so any of those triggers or those emotions that can come up, instead of listening to the tummy ache that you have, or the headache that evolves throughout the day, or the digestion issues that become more and more present as you enter into more relationships, or you enter into different situations. All of a sudden your mind is playing these tricks on you and keeping you stagnant or stuck or repeating these patterns, or we get sort of hijacked by emotions and things like that. So when I think I was introduced to somatics through a coaching practice, but then realized you were doing it, it was this beautiful realization that we can trust our bodies. And I think there is this disconnect. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this of like, why is it that sometimes our minds or our emotions can just take the wheel and just start driving us? Like they are just driving us, and you are just like, I have no idea what's going on anymore.
Yeah, you get kind of hijacked, right? And then you feel out
Yeah.
of control. And that's what so an example is like is anxiety, for example. The mind is taking you on these thought loops, this like panic, and you're just kind of like, I just need to do this. I'm gonna ignore everything else to the point of like I'm not gonna eat properly, I'm not gonna focus on my sleep. I'm just like focused on this thing, a worry for the future that I can't even define. I don't know why I'm worried. I just feel like a panic. I feel like the body and the mind is so disconnected in that sense because the body informs the mind. So if the body
Right.
is feeling tense and anxious and itself, like because of what's been holding on to. So say I had something happen to me when I was 7 years old and I haven't resolved it. It's like a childhood trauma. And my whole life until like for decades, I've had a bad back. I've had tight shoulders. I've had a tight neck. I've gone to so many chiropractors and so many acupuncturists, and I don't know what's going on. I have a great posture. I don't know what's going on. So there's something in the body that's stuck, right? There's like a trauma that's happened that didn't get to complete because I was maybe too young. And so the body's like, okay, I'm going to hang on to this for you until you have the time and space to hear it, to deal with it. It was too much too soon when you're younger. But just keep it in your back. And then, like, who knows? Maybe you'll die with it, but hopefully you'll do some work and then you'll be able to release what you're storing. So if my body is tight and tense and constricted and I'm going through life like this with my shoulders up, my eyes are darting around looking for danger because I'm in hypervigilant state, right? So my shoulders are informing my nervous system to be on alert. So then everything, my whole body becomes on alert. I'm never just like, I'm just, everything's fine. Like I'm an animal in the desert, just looking at the horizon, watching the sunset. that's not usually how our bodies are. Especially in Toronto, our bodies are like a little bit leaning forward, a little bit like always like, what's that noise? Who's coming towards me? Are they safe or not? Like there's so much anxiety built into the environment. So when we're in that state, the body's tight, the mind is going to be like, something must be wrong. I don't know what's wrong because I'm not conscious of what happened when I was 7. I'm conscious of my life now, but it says something's wrong. So then it'll make something up. It could make something up. It'll be like, oh, Carly must not like me. She's kind of like looking at me kind of funny and she's really quiet right now. And I feel like she just made a squint with her eyes. Maybe that she didn't like what I said. Oh, I must like I'll make up this whole thing about everything. That doesn't even, it's not even true, right? But my hypervigilance is making that up. And then if it's not related to that, it could be related to like uh, any number of things. So this guy I was seeing, for example, he went in like from the beginning, like, I have anxious attachment. That was his big identity. And he's like, you cannot trigger my anxious attachment. So you cannot, for example, set a boundary. You cannot have some space because you'll trigger my anxiety and then you'll be a problem because you're making me anxious, right? So that's an extreme example of everyone, like when we're in that state, everything is the problem. Everything's an alarm, right? And we're trying so hard to just feel okay. So other people will be villainized because you're causing the problem. You're making me feel like this. So until we like go inwards and be like, where did my anxious attachment come from? Why do I have this? It's actually not normal. When somebody's like, I have anxious attachment, which is so normalized now, you're basically saying you have childhood trauma, that your needs weren't met by your caregivers as a child, that connection wasn't consistent. And then so now you grow up into an anxious adult. Nobody says that proudly, but they're all like talking about their attachment styles and dating just as if it's a fact, right? Does that kind of answering your question?
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's worrisome in some parts, and I'm sure our listeners are like, "Oh, yep, that's me." But I think in that, like, the mind is so interesting that now we have all these labels for it. We have a label for everything, whether it's anxious attachment or childhood trauma or, oh my gosh, there's all the labels, ADHD, or I have ADHD plus autism, or I'm on the spectrum. Like, there's a spectrum of all of these labels that I think our mind feels very comfortable with. And our mind loves the certainty of saying, I am X, Y, or Z. And then by me sharing that with you, you all of a sudden know how to handle me or not handle me. So I feel like that that is so interesting because that it's almost like a mind trick that we're now playing on ourselves rather than just being like, oh, today I woke up and I have like some feelings, some tightness in my chest. And I'm going to take some deep breaths and maybe not socialize as much today because I just want to listen to myself or something like that versus the mind being like, oh, well, I have anxiety. And so I always have this thing in my chest and I'm just going to go about my day and then I have anxiety and I'll tell people
Yeah,
about it.
exactly. You're totally right. Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting if
Wow.
somebody lied in bed in that situation and just was with the anxiety. Like, don't even try to figure it out. Don't go, why is this happening? Like, not beating yourself up, but just being like, this is just something that I'm experiencing in the moment, and just watching if it passes. Sometimes, like the body just has things that it's experiencing, right? It could be related to your dream. It could be related to any like the planetary transits. Who knows what things are caused by? But it doesn't have to you don't have to create a meaning around it. The brain is a meaning making machine. It'll always try to figure out why things are happening. But if you just let the mind kind of, it's almost like being in meditation, right? You're just letting the mind do its crazy thing where you're like, okay, I'm just going to be with this sensation. What does the anxiety feel like? Where is it in my body? Is it moving? Is it still? Is it getting bigger? Is it staying the same? Is it getting smaller? What color is it? When you take a breath, does the color get brighter? Does it stay the same? See, having that curiosity, it like drops you out of the story and into the sensation. And usually when I bring people into the noticing of that level of sensation, they're like, oh, it moved. Oh, it's gone. Yeah, it just
Wow.
needs to be heard. One thing you said, Carly, was very interesting about ADHD, autism, all these attachment styles, everyone's liking labels. And I think that this trend is so harmful because as soon as we have a label, we have a box, we're stuck, right? And things like ADHD, there's no cure for that. So we're like, okay, well, you're just going to be messed up. Sorry about it. And so now we see this culture of people celebrating their ADHD. But then we have the other part of that, which is like people like Dr. Gabor Mate, who have done quite a lot of study, has written a book and talks a lot about how ADHD is a nervous system dysregulation. It's a nervous system state caused by childhood trauma. When there's too much happening in your childhood, there's a bit of chaos, there's unpredictability in some respect. It doesn't mean abuse. It just means that the house wasn't providing the environment where the child always knew what was going to happen, that it was very calm, that it was like, we're supposed to be living in small villages with like the same people that we see all the time without screens. It's like just playful and peaceful. There's now we live in a very different environment where ping, 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 like, look at this. Kids are always on a screen. I grew up like that, right, with Nintendo and and like also a chaotic home life. So what he says is that when we are like that, our child brain just develops an ADHD pattern to cope. So it's like, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I'm just gonna look at this shiny thing. Oh, I'm gonna disassociate and I'm gonna go la 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 and play. Like I just come up with all these coping mechanisms. And you grow up and you have the same coping mechanisms. So if I feel a discomfort in my mind or my body, I'll just switch channels into something else, like very rapidly, right? People think it's multitasking, but it's actually just like hyper fixation really quickly, multiple things. And I know that I trust what he says because I have been accused of having ADHD, especially by the person that I was talking about that I had dated. And that was one of the reasons he didn't want to continue the relationship because he thought I had ADHD. But I developed symptomology during that end of that relationship and in different points in my life when I was highly stressed. And my body responded to the stress with ADHD symptoms. And so that made me realize, oh, okay, that is a nervous system state. And I know how to walk myself back to not experiencing that as my common reality.
It is so dangerous. I pictured this box that we're just like it's almost like we're excited to jump into the ADHD box because in a way it also gives us that certainty, and it exactly relates to what we are searching for, is that now we ADHD is because we didn't have certainty. And so then if we can label ourselves with X, Y, or Z, then we're like, okay, well, now I'm certain that I have that, and I can be certain that that there's like an answer for me. And it's so interesting because, I feel like all of us at some point can be like, well, I have that. I could have that. Maybe that's me. And then you just have to think and be like, okay, yes, it could be. Yes, you could be experiencing some nervous system dysregulation. And what can you do to become unstuck by it? And what can you listen to in your body? How can you become more aware of it? And I think like that's the best for me. My understanding is that that might be a better solution rather than slapping a label on yourself and being like, oh, well, now I'm this and now I'll just be this. And now I can tell people about it. And so they'll understand when I have maybe some toxic traits come up or things that people don't like so much, and be like, oh, well, I have ADHD. So you have to be accepting of all of me versus like, well, maybe you're not going to say, hey, I had some childhood trauma. My house wasn't always certain all the time. And now I look for certainty in the world. And so sometimes I multitask or I task switch all the time. And I'm constantly looking for the next
Yes,
stimulation.
exactly.
It's so much easier to say I have
Yeah,
ADHD.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's creating a trend in society that's somewhat troubling. Like being late, for example, is like acceptable now, right? And people just go like, "Oh, I was distracted. I was like," and I'm like, no, there needs to be some sort of ability because even when I was in those heightened states, I planned things out really well. I'm like, okay, 20 extra minutes. I'm gonna get there early. Like there's ways to manage so that you can fit in with, the expectations of people that are around you that are like people that you care about and love.
So, in the world of somatics and everything that you have learned, we talk a lot about freedom on this podcast. If you could describe freedom in the terms of whether it's pulling from your own personal experience and I should say, and pulling from somatics and everything you've learned, how could you find freedom in the mind or in the body or in our human experience through what you know
Hmm.
about somatics?
I'd love to just go back to the previous topic to like cap this question. So, for example, ADHD, right? What if we weren't meant to live that way we're living, where we're so highly structured and highly timed, and like work starts at this time, ends at this time. We have this much time for breaks. Like we're over schedule. So we're not actually in intuitive flow of our lives, of our day. Like imagine our ancestors just a few generations ago, maybe 5 or 6 generations ago, they were probably living in a totally different experience where, okay, I have to plow the fields, but I'll kind of do it around when I wake up, which may or may not be before, during, or after sunrise, right? There's some kind of flow that we're in tune with the reality around us. So if you have ADHD now, how can we kind of recreate that? And what I found helpful is listening to the body with somatics. So I try to do this right like all the time. So if I'm reading a book and I'm like, okay, I should really read this book because I'm like not reading enough and like I should be doing it. I'll maybe read a page and I'll be like, I don't want to read this book. So I'm going to remove the should and just feel into what I want to do. And I'm feeling like I'm disengaged. I could say my ADHD is acting up. I can't read this book. I'm like looking at this and I'm playing with my cat and I'm like looking at my phone. Is that ADHD or is that not listening to my system, which doesn't want to read the book? And then me tuning in and saying, what do you want? Oh, I just want to like look out the window and have a cup of cacao and watch. Just watch the street. Yeah, I don't want to be productive or do something. And then I might do that for 2 minutes, be like, okay, I don't want to do something else now. Right. So maybe I'm going to do 10 things in 10 minutes. Is that ADHD or is that being in flow of what my impulse is and what my evening wants to be?
That sounds exactly like freedom
Exactly.
to me. And, I get that there's life that happens. Clients have deadlines, work's got to be worked, and food has to be eaten. And sometimes it's nice to be able to schedule in some social time for yourself or some downtime. But, like, wow, wouldn't that be beautiful if there's just like an hour a day where I just like allowed myself to be like, huh, I want to go sit in that chair over there. Or like, I want to, yeah, sip a cup of tea and I just want to like watch something. Or maybe I do want to read a book but I only want to read one page. I don't want to finish the chapter. I just want to read a page, say that I read it, feel like I've done something that was like enjoying, like I found enjoyment in, and then that like just flowed through that. Cause yeah, you could hop between 10 different things in an hour and you could call it
Mhm.
ADHD.
Yeah. Or you could call being in flow. Like, what if there's some intelligence that's driving things that wanted you to read one specific thing on a page, like get an insight and then have a tea to contemplate what was on that page? And then what if it wanted you to move your body a little bit with stretching, just to integrate it in your cells? Like this is all being made up, but that could be what this intelligence is trying to tell you by making you not want to do this, be compelled to do this, right? What would happen if we listened to that intelligence?
I don't know what would happen. I feel that probably a lot of the listeners to the podcast are female, and I think that really would probably resonate. It definitely resonates with me because and I think men can do this too. And I just feel very like there's the feminine flow to sort of discover and do things. And yeah, maybe it is your higher self. I'm having like a profound moment here. Maybe that is, whether it's God or your higher self or the universe or this intuitive knowing that, like, if you can surrender just a little bit, step away from the shoulds, can you just flow through and trust that you are just meant to read that page? You are just meant to go for that walk, to see that thing, to find that thing on the side of the road, or to encounter that human being and to have that smile on your face. Like maybe all of that was just this intuitive knowing from yourself or God that you were meant to
Yeah,
have that day.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's
For freedom
beautiful.
too, what's coming to mind is that attachment theory again, because I feel in my own journey that I was very attached to attachment theory, right? Like it's again a box that's very simple and easy and accepted now. But what I have learned through my teachers and through my own experience is that it's a nervous system state, just like everything else. So instead of having the mind being like, I'm this because of this, and this is what I should do and say, what is happening in your nervous system that is pinging off. If I was dating you, what am I feeling right now about being in your presence? Do I feel an anxiety? Okay, what is that anxiety? I have to be curious about it. It could be, oh, I'm excited about what's happening. My mind could make that up, or my body could, if I listened, it could say, oh, this feels really familiar and scary because somehow my intelligence, my body's intelligence, knows that this person has a pattern that feels exciting in a way that feels, people go like, I felt a spark. That spark is something to be cautious about because it's probably I'm peeing off your wound, right? I'm like, oh, this person's going to trigger me. It's going to be this whirlwind. It's going to be so chaotic. And my body loves chaos because I grew up in so much chaos and uncertainty around love. And I can tell this person's going to just be exactly that, right? So that's my intelligence. But if I'm just thinking from my mind, then I make up a whole different story. So freedom for me is like disconnecting from that whole reality. And actually, I'm in a phase now where I'm not dating. I haven't dated since that person, which is almost a year and a half now. And I'm actually quite satisfied. I've decentered relationships, decentered men, and been like, what do I want to do? Just like that flowing evening, right? What does my life look like without being obsessed with relationship and partnership and the one? And I gotta say, like, that's the biggest freedom I've ever experienced because up until now, my focus has been finding relationship and coming back to like, I don't need to focus on that right now has been the biggest sort of freedom I have now because now I can pick and choose. I'm not obsessed with finding or searching and meeting a need externally.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure your mind did a fair amount of taking over in that and to drive you to do certain activities to then, I can imagine that that would have been like, okay, well, I need to go socialize because then I need to find that person. Whereas versus your body could be like, no, please, I'm tired. I have a headache. I don't want to socialize right now. I don't want to go to that party. And then your mind's like, no, we have to go find the person that's right for me. And now you're out socializing with
Yes,
a headache because you refused to listen to your
yes,
body.
yeah,
And Toronto is packed full of that energy specifically.
yeah. There's a
Yeah.
hunger. Everyone's hungry.
Every episode, we discover a new version of freedom. And I absolutely love that we've discovered this. And I feel like I definitely want to try that on. Just like I'm going to set aside some time. Maybe I won't even tell
Yeah.
myself how much time. And I am just going to meander through my evening and see what I'm drawn to. What a
Mhm.
beautiful like assignment for us all to do.
Actually, if you love this in the summer when the weather's nicer, it's so nice to have a whole day of just I'm just gonna go to a location and listen to what my body wants. Does it want to go left or right or forward? What does it want to eat? Does it want to sit in the park? Like, don't look at your phone, don't look at the time, and just live like our ancestors did, truly listening to your natural intelligence. And magic can happen. Yeah. Those serendipitous moments, you'll meet different people that you wouldn't have met had you had like a strict agenda. Like, I got to rush to the streetcar with this coffee in my hand. And like, I'm just, singular focused on one thing instead of opening up to the Serengeti, the desert. What else is available on the horizon that I can pick up?
That's beautiful. And I think that is definitely I can resonate that with that deeply because one of the reasons that I chose to make the big career shift was that it was always just this predetermined time that I needed. And my life, although I was working in alternative education and the bell didn't sound like a school bell, it sounded like a sound bowl. But there was still this timing and you had to be at school by 8:30 and snack was at this time and and lunch was at this time and not because we wanted to stick ourselves in a box, but because there needed to be some sort of order and chaos, like order to the chaos of a classroom, and parents needed to be picked up on time, but there needed to be activities where the day would flow. And for me, it's like, woof, I had spent 10 years living my life on a
Yeah.
bell. And that was probably one of the biggest motivations that I don't want to live life on a bell. I don't want a bell to tell me when I can eat
Yeah.
lunch. Like,
Yeah.
nope.
What happens for you in your system when you hear a bell now?
I don't, I haven't heard a bell, but I do know the sound of a playground. like, there's something that comes up my back that I just go like, "Oh, no." And not that the sound of children laughing and having a great time is a bad thing, but I am just personally triggered by the sound of a recess playground now that just does something to me where I'm like, "And I'm walking the other way."
Nice. You're listening to the intelligence
Yeah.
of your body responses. Amazing.
Yeah. So, Sabrina, if you could look back on yourself, either a younger version of yourself or someone in our listenership who does they're sort of feeling the same thing. They're like, there's something about this rigid, stuck life. There's a part of my life that feels stuck. And maybe they don't even know what it is, or maybe you didn't know in your younger self. What would be that one piece of advice or that one piece of this is take this tiny baby step to start to live a life unbound?
I would say that realize that most of our personality, this is everyone, most of our personalities are conditioning. It's the conditioning that our family gave us, that society gives us, like a people pleaser, for example, that's conditioning, right? So, who would you be if you didn't have any of the conditioning in your life? If you actively tried to decondition, right? Even what I said about being obsessed with relationship, that's conditioning because since I was a kid, it's been ingrained in me that, oh, you got to get married by a certain age. You don't want to die alone. You should really like all these stories, right? So when I deconditioned from that, I had a lot of freedom. I had a lot of ease because I wasn't always searching, hungry, convincing myself that I wasn't fully whole, that I was missing something fundamental, that something was wrong with me because I didn't have this. So, where in your life could you be open to the idea that you're just conditioned? And who would you be without that conditioning?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. I love that. And just pick one small little piece of your life. And it doesn't have to be big. It could just be small. Like I'm a people pleaser or we identify so much with our career. Like for me it was I'm a teacher. And like I could just say I'm a teacher and that would be it. And it's so fun now to think about who is Carly as not a teacher, as just who is Carly? Not Carly the teacher or I'm a teacher. It's who the heck am I? And then what would I do if I was just
Yes,
me?
exactly.
It's so
Yeah, you're reminding me of
fascinating.
something I read about um, trying to introduce yourself as without your conditioned role. So you're not a teacher, Carly. You're Carly, and you taught or you teach, right? And you podcast, and and you're this and you're that. But if when you disidentify from like your job or your profession as your identity, that's when you can see who else am I. So even people who are like, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend, I'm this and that. Okay, who are you without other people? Like if you had no other people to relate to as your identity, who are you? And very few people can answer that. Mhm. How would you answer that?
I feel I'm still very much on that journey
It's a
right now.
lifelong journey.
It is, yeah. But and I remember specifically, I think I was very attached to the idea of saying I'm a teacher because I would see people's like face light up and their reaction was actually a driver for me to say I'm a teacher. Cause sometimes it would surprise people or like I used to have my head shaved and I looked maybe like an unconventional teacher. And so I would relish in people's reaction to me telling them that I'm a teacher. And then when I noticed that, I was like, I think I'm kind of like, there's a feeling in me that I'm lighting up when I say that. So now, yeah, gosh, I'm Carly. I feel like when I introduce myself, I'm like, I have this big life force behind me. And yeah, I feel like I love to play and have fun. I could do a little bit more of that. And that's as far as I've
I
gotten
love
right now.
that. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty good for your age. A lot of people your age are still in that role of like, this is what I'm doing. I work on this thing. And so you're already breaking out of your conditioning with a lot of curiosity. That's how we should be. Like you hear people when they're like, I'm 60, I'm going back to university, right? People can constantly change and evolve and get to know themselves.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, We're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time today, Sabrina. And thank you for coming on the podcast and exploring freedom and what it means to live an unbound life. I hope that our listeners got something out of this. And I feel like a couple little of those tasks would be really, really great foundational baby steps to start to understand a life that is a little bit more free and a little bit more
Yes, beautiful.
unbound.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. All right, everyone. If you liked this episode, give us a like, subscribe, write a review if you want. Share this with somebody who could learn a little bit from becoming free in the body. And stay tuned next week. We will see you on the next one and continue living a life unbound.